What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here, Mr. Bill Krivnick to my right, and across from us, one of the coyote-killingest folks I've ever had the pleasure of knowing in my life, Mr. Dustin Butler. We've got him on the podcast again. Dustin, welcome.
Thanks, guys. How are you?
We're doing good. We're doing good. So the topic of today's conversation, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I've got a lanyard full of calls, and it's the importance of hand calls for coyotes. Now, Dustin, I know you're like also, you're one of the most coyote-killingest folks I know. You're also one of the most humble folks I know. You don't like to, in fact, you're like, oh, you brought me out of retirement, and this and that. And even when we talked the last time, you're like, yeah, I just don't do it as much anymore. I killed like 40 last week. I'm like, okay, well, I think you're still doing okay. Yeah. So, but let's talk hand calls. I know you work them into your calling repertoire, but why should a person carry some hand calls with them?
It's a good question. And I know, Mark, you kind of outlined a few bullets and things that you wanted to talk about. I guess there's really a number of reasons, and we can attack it in any order that you want. I think for guys getting started in the sport, hand calls are inexpensive. It's a great way for them to get started and get rolling and see if this is something that they're passionate about. But I also feel like, from my perspective, the electronic calls have come so far now from where they started, 20 plus years ago, as far as the quality and the sound libraries and the ways that you can use them. But, there's still kind of a pure form of the sport, in my opinion. And that's probably, the hand calls, the mouth blown calls. I think there's still a level of satisfaction that comes from, learning them and mastering them and tricking coyotes to come to the mouth blown calls or the hand calls.
For sure. And like you said, I mean, definitely e-collars have come a long way. I know Bill and I both brought our lanyards here, and we both, have e-collars that we bring with us, but we also both bring mouth calls. But, I mean, heck, you even look at those. It's like, I remember like the old Johnny Walker, cassette tape ones that you'd see, and then, now it's just like these digital sounds and remotes. And so, but it's still as much as I love that tech and use that tech and leverage it, it doesn't necessarily replace the need for a handful of mouth calls. And one of the things that I like the most, Dustin, maybe you can speak to this, is just the quick access nature of it. Like, you might be sometimes you just need to get to call quick.
Now, yep.
Yeah, and Mark, you and I have been on hunts together where, we weren't necessarily pursuing coyotes, but happened to have a hand call in the backpack and found opportunities to use them to call coyotes, right? Kill coyotes. And it's nice to have them in your pack or in your bino harness all year long. And, you certainly can find some opportunities to use them when you're elk hunting or deer hunting or bear hunting or doing other things. So having quick access to them is definitely a benefit.
For sure. Actually on that hunt that you're talking about, we were hunting bears. We spotted a coyote way across the valley on a different road system, and we were able to call that coyote in. But then later in the week, we actually made a stalk on a bear that was gone when we got there, got the old hand call out and called him out of the brush and, got a crack at him. So
that's right.
Like you said, of course, now we're talking bears, and of course, it's getting close to spring now, so it's hard for me not to be thinking about bears. But
I seem to recall we were both pretty excited about blowing a predator call in grizzly country.
Yes. I'm not saying it was the smartest move we've ever made, but luckily only the black bear came out to take a peek. But, and you do a heck of a lot more than this than I do, but one thing that I like, Dustin, is like being able to like kind of customize the sound or impart your own emotion to, like, even a distress sound. I'd imagine that's something you're doing as well.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's one of the advantages that hand calls give a guy, right? Is something that's unique that those coyotes haven't heard before. I've found that late in the season, mixing it up and going back to the hand calls or in areas that are even heavily pressured, something that's just a little bit different, a little bit unique, kind of has your own flavor to it, seems to do the trick. And, we've had some days where the electronics aren't working and we just say, hey, we're going to run and gun and throw the hand calls in our pocket, take off and go and, mix it up from time to time. And it, seems to work.
What about like closed read versus open read? What are you doing there?
It's a great question. The closed read calls are pretty foolproof, right? if you're new, you don't have a lot of experience, it's pretty easy to mimic a jackrabbit or a cottontail with a closed reed call. They're very easy to blow. It's also pretty easy to do some fawn bleats and some other sounds with those, but they don't have the versatility of the open reed calls. The closed reed calls, if you're calling up north where we live, you better have 2 or 3 of them, and you leave one on the dashboard of the truck thawing out, or you get really familiar with popping reeds out and thawing them and putting them back in. They're prone to freeze up on you in really cold temperatures. But the open reed call gives you a lot of versatility. You can do everything from your coyote vocals to your distress sounds, from rabbit to fawn bleat to pup distress, and like I say, all your coyote vocalizations. So if I had to choose one or the other, I would take the open reed call, just because you can do so much more with it. But both work well and both have their place.
Yeah. What do you, you mentioned, distress sounds and coyote vocalizations. What kind of vocals are you making on the coyote side?
It really just depends on the time of year. And I think one of the benefits of guys learning how to use, hand calls, and whether it's hand calls or electronics, really understanding the coyote language, understanding, what their annual cycle looks like as far as, when they're breeding, when they're denning, when the pups are leaving the den. Early in the year, distress calls. So when I say early in the year, I'm talking early October through November. You can pretty much blow a distress call and have pretty good success. But after those coyotes have been pressured, you get into late December, into January and February. Really, if you're going to be consistent, you got to start using those coyote vocalizations, and that can be anything from you can never go wrong with an interrogation howl. I always try to sound more submissive and more friendly, unless you are in a PAX territory or you get a big old male kind of challenging you or giving you the dickens, right? Then, you kind of challenge it back or be more aggressive. But I think the same is true with elk or anything else, right? I don't personally try to sound like a 400 bull when I bugle. You kind of want to sound like a younger, more submissive, bull. Same thing with coyotes. But I think learning your interrogation howls, your pup distress is key. I've been asked if you could only pick one sound to use all year long, what would it be? For me, it would be pup distress. It works all year long, right? You get a protective instinct, you get curiosity, you get dominance, you get a number of things that you kind of set off in those coyotes. But and then you get more into it, if you get into the breeding season, a male howl and a female howl, mixing it up so you sound like a pair of coyotes. Learning that female in heat howl. And you can listen to a lot of those sounds online. You can listen to one electronic caller and then certainly work on them with a mouth blown call. But I think understanding the kind of the coyote cycle throughout the year is a key for knowing what sounds to use and when.
For sure.
It's interesting that you said the pup distress. Like on Saturday, quite literally, the only thing I could get coyotes to come out of the wood line with was pup screams. Nothing else was working. That was the only thing that I could actually get them to come out in the open somewhat and present, somewhat of a shot. So, and it's kind of interesting. This time of year, there's really not that many pups around. They're having those pups in June, July usually, I think, or even earlier than that too. So yeah, like you said, it's just
May a lot of times, right? June, July, August, they're typically hanging out around the den, but early fall when those pups are dispersing and leaving. But there's something about that pup distress call all year long, or a coyote distress in general, where if they think you're in their territory or they think there's a coyote fight over there, there's a curiosity factor. But I think in those, older male and female coyotes, there's just a natural reaction to, wanting to go protect whatever is happening to that pup. It's kind of like when we're in the grocery store and you hear a baby crying or yelling and you're hoping, man, I hope that's not my kid, but I'm going to double check just to be sure. Right. Sure. It's something that's good to have in your repertoire.
Yeah.
Are you ever doing a mix of hand calling and e-calling at the same time, or switching on and off between the two on a single set?
Yeah, we started doing that years and years ago and called it combination calling. And when we were hunting, or when we've hunted areas that are really highly pressured and you're just trying to be creative and come up with some things that maybe those coyotes haven't heard, or you're trying to add some believability, howling with a partner back and forth, right? We've had great success with that. But what I have found too is with the e-collar, I personally use a lot of bird sounds, right? Crows and magpies and things of that nature. And so I've had pretty good success with bird sounds playing on an e-collar while you're playing a distress sound, right? With your mouth blown call, or a coyote fight on your e-collar while you're, running distress on your mouth blown call. Kind of gives some variation to what those coyotes are hearing.
Awesome. I love that. We covered, I guess, so the primary distress sound that I've ever really used with my hand calls is just, I guess I'd call it like a variation of a rabbit squeal, I have used some fawn distress, called a baron one time with a fawn distress. That was back in my Washington days. But what about you, Dustin? When you are using a distress sound, are you just using that typical rabbit? You got any other tricks up your sleeve?
I think the rabbit's probably the most common for just about everybody out there, right? And you can use different tones, obviously different calls for a deeper, raspier jackrabbit sound versus a higher pitch cottontail. I've played with some bird distress woodpecker type sounds on a mouth blown call, and those seem to work pretty good. I personally believe that coyotes are opportunists, and I think that there's the 10% of the time where there's a specific sound that's going to trigger them or break them loose, or maybe they're hanging up and they don't want to come. But, we spend a lot of time scouting and trying to find the low hanging fruit, especially when you're trying to put up big numbers in contests and things like that. Right. And it's not unusual to find areas with really high coyote densities that are heavily pressured. And then you might find some areas that maybe the coyotes aren't quite as thick, but they're running over the top of you. And I'll be honest, I think guys get a little bit too hung up on exactly what that distress sound is. And I think coyotes are opportunists. I think in most cases, if they're going to come, they're going to come. That being said, as you get later in the year into January and February, I tend to stay away from the rabbit, more coyote vocals. And if I am going to use distress sounds, use something that's a little bit unique or different, which the open reed calls really give that to you.
Gotcha. What about, I don't anymore. I used to keep a little squeaker, taped to the fore end of my gun or something like that. If I really wanted to, last minute, if I didn't want to, have the motion, heck, that was back when all I had was hand calls,
Sure.
But do you do anything like that with a little squeaker bulb or anything like?
Yeah. I've carried a coaxer for years. And I think they definitely have their place. I mean, we've had days where the coyote densities are such that we're not walking very far between sets and starting with a coaxer and then just a really, really soft, mouth blown call. I've played with coaxers over the years, with coyotes out mousing in the field and, sneak up and set up and just kind of want to see how well they hear. And I've seen coyotes 500-600 yards away lift their heads up to nothing more than a coaxer and just come bombing to the call. And I think guys err on the side of using too much volume in a lot of cases. And there's windy days and there's different types of terrain that you're calling where you really want to blast the sound out there. But it really boils down to the coyote density and the conditions and the terrain you're in. But they have incredible hearing. Coaxers work very well. We've used coaxers for years as a way to let your partner know that there's a coyote coming, right? Just hit the squeaker a little bit. And I think the coaxer is also a key when you're trying to bring coyotes into shotgun range, right? If we're contest calling and one guy's packing a shotgun and another guy's on the rifle, when those coyotes are coming hard, if you can just stay on that coaxer a little bit and keep them coming hard to the call, it's a really good way to get coyotes right to the shotgun for some close in shooting. So we do use a coaxer, and I think it definitely has its place.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm convinced.
Yeah, I need to get one of those. I need to try that, I guess.
You brought up volume. Like, what with a hand call, do you, in general, or maybe it's the answer is it depends, but are you generally starting off softer and then kind of gradually up in the volume, or what's your program there?
Yeah, typically. I mean, start soft and work up to, full volume by mid set and work your way back off whatever full volume is going to be. But I think for years and years, there was this rule of thumb, right? Like I'm going to travel a mile between stands, and I'm going to use call A, then B, then C, and I'm going to do it this volume level. I think that's great. I think it's good for everyone to have kind of a general rule of thumb, but I really think it boils down to, I keep going back to coyote density. If you're in an area that's, got a lot of coyotes per square mile, and you're only setting up once every mile, you're driving past or walking past a lot of coyotes. And so, if we've done our scouting and we know there's a high density of coyotes, we might, just take a hand call, real soft hand call, and call for 5 to 10 minutes and walk 300 yards and do it again. We've had some days where we put up a lot of numbers doing that. So a lot of it is the density of coyotes in the area, the terrain you're calling, how hard the wind is blowing. If I've got a piece of public land I'm calling from and I know I can't make a set for 5 more miles, I'm probably going to work up to full volume, give it an extra 10 or 15 minutes on that stand and see what shows up. And I think even with your mouth blown calls, right, there's some that are more quiet than others, right? So, I've used a mouthpiece from like the Dan Thompson howlers for really windy days when you're having a hard time getting that distress sound out there. And I probably wouldn't do that if it was, a quiet, calm day. But there's just a lot of variables that play into the volume and kind of how you approach those sets.
For sure. Bill, anything on your mind? Or I've been talking the whole time.
Diaphragm calls. What are your feeling towards those? I think they're kind of one of the more difficult ones to learn, at least that they have been for me. Closed read, open read, I got those pretty quick, but I got banned from practicing diaphragm calls in the house from the wife because apparently it was just too terrible of a noise. But where do you think those fit in? And
you're probably making a great call.
Your wife,
yeah.
Your wife and my wife could sit down for a bottle of wine and talk about how annoying the practicing of calls is in the house or in the garage while the neighbor's dogs are barking and howling and going crazy. But I'm not personally, I don't use the diaphragm calls a whole lot. I've played with them a little bit. I think they are really good for like pup distress. You get multiples in, you got something right in your mouth to start doing ki or pup distress for things like that. I personally, I just sound better on an open read call for my howling, for my vocals, things like that.
Sure.
But that's the one place where I think they work pretty well is having it in your mouth for, like a ki or a pup distress after a shot. But they're not my, there's a lot of guys that are a lot better with diaphragm calls than I am. I think all of them probably are.
They do take a lot of practice, I've found. It's been a lot of drives to work blowing on that thing, trying to get it to sound somewhat like a coyote, but I'm getting there, I hope so.
I think it's worked a time or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about and this is definitely a question, but do you find, you can very quickly, customize the sound on a distress or an open read call. Do you feel that affords you more flexibility when you're reading a dog that is coming, but maybe he's or she is, acting a certain way or has a certain demeanor?
As far as being able to mix it up on that call,
being able to be like, oh, this, maybe I'm making this up, but oh, this dog's acting like really, really submissive, or this call, I can tell this dog is coming, but like it's stopping a lot and like very cautious or something like that. Is that where you ramp it up or change it or switch to something else? Or
it's just kind of a case-by-case basis, I guess. And it's just like you said, Mark, it's kind of reading their body language, right? What they're responding to, what they're not responding to. And they don't all come to the call the same way, right? I think with your younger coyotes, a lot of times, especially if you're doing vocals, they will come more slowly, right? They're a little more skittish and they're probably not going to come to the shotgun like a big adult coyote would in the right circumstances. So I definitely think you've got to be versatile, and you've got to learn to read those coyotes' body language. And, I don't care how long you've done it, there's still those days where you're just like, man, I'm not sure what this thing wants to hear to come any closer. And I better take the opportunity that he gives me and try to make a good shot. But, I definitely think you've got to be versatile and read their body language and figure out what they're responding to.
For sure. Are you able to, if you're going to compare using the remote versus a hand call, are you able to make transitions like is faster with a hand call between two things, or do you think that it's a horse apiece? That's a Wisconsin saying, by the way, that I've adopted over time.
Sure.
Or is it just like, either or, you're going to be just as fast as one or the other?
It's probably 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think it just depends on what you're accustomed to and what you've spent the most time doing, right? And at the end of the day, whether it's coyote hunting or anything else, there's no replacement for time in the field and experience and just doing it over and over and over again. And if it's mouth blown calls, it's knowing where they're at on your lanyard, or what you're going to do, right? Just kind of knowing what you're going to do in any given situation. The electronics have certainly made it easy with presets or a button. You just push a button and get your coyote distress or whatever you've selected playing. But I think it's just a lot of it's personal preference, and at the end of the day, it's the amount of hours you put in and the time you spend doing it.
Mm-hmm. What about, cost can be a factor.
Yep.
When it comes to hunting, like gear costs money, right? What would you? In my experience, hand calls cost a lot less than an expensive e-collar.
Great way to start off. If you're just getting into it, like you said, it's way more affordable than a couple $100 electronic call, and busting out that kind of change for something you're not sure if you want to stick with. But yeah, there's an odd sense of accomplishment too when you call on a coyote with hand calls. I've found it. The first time I did it, my batteries were dead on my remote, so I was kind of sitting there. I walked half a mile into this spot to go calling, and now I can't with my electronic caller. Grabbed a couple of hand calls, called the coyote in. I thought, dang, I'm pretty good at this. But it was like my 4th coyote I've ever killed, I think, at that time. So, but it's a weird sense of accomplishment using the hand calls for sure. And yeah, it's a great way to get into it.
I agree with that, and I'll be honest. Some of the best days I've ever had have been, with hand calls, and yeah, it's inexpensive. There's definitely a sense of pride that comes with learning how to use them, and I think there's some advantages that guys overlook too, depending on the kind of terrain you're in. When you're out west and you're calling some more open country, you see guys walk over the hill and they want to walk 50 yards or 100 yards to set up their electronic call, and they've got a whole lot of visibility walking around. And, the hand call allows you to just crawl over the hill and tuck in, to your spot and start calling. And, there are some advantages of the hand calls as far as, just flexibility and ease of use. And, all the years that we used to hunt contests when we were really under the gun to put up numbers, we'd put the electronic collar in the truck, and it was kind of the run and gun. Let's just see how quick we can go and how much country we can cover and how many we can kill. And the hand calls are, they're great. And if somebody believes that you're just going to kill more coyotes with electronics than hand calls, there's probably a debate to be had there.
Yep.
Nope, I love it. And Bill, you brought up something that I had on my checklist, and like I said, I'm a big proponent of e-collars too, but no batteries, so it's not something that, if you do have an e-collar, I think
reliability.
The good thing to do is like what you did, or probably all of us do, is, you do have both. That way you don't get caught in a pinch, or, something goes.
Well, and anybody that's using an e-collar, and I use an e-collar a lot, nothing against them at all. I'm a big proponent of them as well, but a guy should always have a hand call either around his neck or in his e-collar bag or in his pocket, because, when they fail, you got to have a plan B.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
That's
always
right.
be prepared.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, and I'm the king of having more gear, but at the end of this conversation, I've just come full circle to where I'm at right now, and the answer is both. I'm not saving any money.
Yeah.
Well, looking at your lanyard, Mark, I feel kind of naked. I didn't bring my assortment of hand calls to the podcast, so I apologize for that.
Well, when I knew you were coming on, I was like, I'm gonna have to flex some way.
You got to look professional, look the part.
It sure ain't gonna be with the numbers I've been putting up. But I haven't been going as much as I'd like to. That's for sure. But actually, it's no fault of the calls or the e-collar. It's me. I'm the problem. We've pinpointed it. But no, Dustin, man, I know. I don't think I kind of ran through my list of questions, about the benefits and just the advantages that hand calls can afford a hunter. Do you got anything left? Any questions, Bill?
A lot of good information here today. I'm always open ears to guys that have called a lot more coyotes than I have. So it's always good to learn something, and I learned a lot here today. So I really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you guys having me. It's always good to catch up with you guys and see what you're up to. And I am old and retired, and appreciate you guys reaching out to the old guy to jump on and talk coyote hunting. I always enjoy talking coyote hunting.
Sure. Well, it's part of our philanthropy here at Vortex, Dustin. So
part of your goodwill.
Yeah. No way, man. You're one of the best, and we appreciate the info and always appreciate when you come on and truly enjoy chatting. And any other parting words of wisdom before we jump off here? I just don't want to miss anything. I don't even want to be done. I know there's so much to the Dustin Butler.
I guess the one thing that I would say, whether it's hand calls or electronics or anything else, I feel like you got to be maybe a little bit not right in the head to be a good coyote hunter, because I'll tell you what, I don't think there's anything in the world that'll test your persistence more than learning how to call and hunt predators. And for guys just getting rolling, I remember the days and weeks and months and weekends of just grinding to try to figure out how to do it, how to be consistent at it. But, it's, I think persistence, and I think that's true with any kind of hunting, but calling coyotes, especially, if you're going to figure it out, you got to be willing to put in the time and just hang in there and don't give up, because eventually it kind of all clicks and comes together.
Absolutely. There's some humility in coyote hunting, and, that's
for sure. And that is a very good piece of advice, because contrary to what you might see in, every coyote video that you've ever watched, I mean, those are the highlight reels. So like you said, there is some in between time, and heck, I think it's more difficult to call a coyote than it is to kill a deer. Maybe not a truly big deer, but I mean, just it's not easy, and that's part of the challenge. And I think that's why you grew to love it so much, and we enjoyed it as well, as it is truly a challenge. I mean, you're matching wits with something that they know their terrain and they know their environment, and they're pretty cunning. So, well, awesome, Dustin. Well, thank you so much, and you've inspired me to get back out there and try it again.
I'm going to be blowing the hand call next time I go out.
I'm going to go home and practice tonight.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And hopefully you found this useful. I know I did. And until next time, good luck calling.